So hey everyone, this talk is called Crumbling the Cookie, and it is basically about I really don't like cookies, I think we need to fix them, and how might we do it. So to introduce myself, I'm Zach Voase. I work at Netflix in Los Angeles in the Hollywood office, or one of the Hollywood offices. I'm on the access control engineering team, which until recently, I did a lot more like identity-related stuff. Now I focus mostly on authorization, but it's very recently that I switched to like focus more on authorization. So a lot of the stuff is still very fresh in my mind. Here's a quick run through of what we're going to talk about today. So we'll just do a quick run through of what a cookie is. A lot of us are practitioners, we know what cookies are, but I really want to go into like what's wrong with them as they currently are. And I'm going to talk about what we probably want in a better solution for authentication on the web. And I'm going to give like a rough sketch of a protocol that would basically be able to supplant cookies and fix a lot of the problems in them. And by the way, this is cookies as like authentication state. So like establishing browser sessions for like human users, less about like OAuth, like application to application and like third party, grants and stuff like that. So I'm going to start talking about what I call the rusty chain of authentication. So authentication is just proof of who you are, and a proof is a chain of facts which together give us confidence that the request came from who we think it came from. So the first step is that we establish the person we're talking to, like the human identity that we're talking to. We use OIDC, SAML, email, phone, use like a pre-established username and password. There are better and worse ways to figure out like who the person is that we're talking to, and to like kind of prove that that person is on the other end of the line. And then, best practice is to also verify the device that they're using to talk to us. And so that's FIDO, it's WebAuthn, time-based one-time passwords, SMS, again, varying levels of like security properties, like with those, some are better than others. And then finally, when we've gone through like the ritual of logging a user in, and we've done that MFA, and we've done the username and password verification, or whatever else, we will put a cookie in their browser that says this is the session, they are logged in. And then, on the sort of level below that, like the connection is usually secured by TLS, which has all of its own stuff. Don't really have time to get into that, but basically the cookie, in concert with these other things, allows you to short circuit the first two expensive steps of this authentication flow. And so when you have a cookie, you have like, it is a shortcut to basically say, I don't want to do the full like cryptographic proof of who this person is on every like request. And this is like largely like, browsers, users using browsers to talk to web services. But the cookie is a really weak part of this whole thing, because that cookie says like this user is logged in. Don't worry, you don't need to check their username and password again. You don't need to MFA them. But if someone steals that cookie, like it's game over. They have like an MFA'd session to act not just on behalf of that user, but they are that user to your system. And there's like a thriving market on the dark web of logged in cookies. I think the Feds busted one recently, like Genesis Market, where people were just selling like logged in cookies, and you could just put those cookies in a browser. And I think like a very prominent YouTube channel got taken over because they. Hello. Is it working? Oh, there we go. Their cookies got stolen, and someone was able to hijack their sessions and put a bunch of Bitcoin scams. It's bad. It's really bad. And so just quick run through of like what cookies are. They are bearer tokens, the way that we use them today for authentication. It's a secret string that you have to present on every request to prove that you are like this person who completed some big auth flow. You can either do a session ID, if you're implementing a service where you maybe have like a key value store, you have like a random key that you generate for each session, and then in the key value store you say, oh, it's this user like Zach. Or you can do JWTs. In the browser, JWT is a little less common because usually we want, like when we're setting it for actual sort of like web interactions with like the first party, with the user themselves. I mean, people don't use JWTs as much. There's an additional complication there with JWTs. You have to do key management, whereas session IDs, you just do state management on the server side. But cookies also contain an expiration time, domain and path constraints, so you can say, don't give this cookie to anything other than this path that I'm telling you to, or this domain. There are some security flags on the cookie. And these are all requests to the browser not to share that very sensitive, very valuable secret, that bearer token, with places that shouldn't have it, because the consequences of sharing it are catastrophic. But these are all like courtesies that we ask of the browser. We hope the browsers implement them. We hope that we've been very thorough in figuring out our domain and path constraints. But to be completely clear, if an attacker gets the bearer token, none of these things matter. These are like best effort things. They aim to prevent exfiltration of the cookie, but they do nothing if it gets exfiltrated. So you're kind of just done. And so kind of like in summary, there's a ton of attack surface area for like authentication cookies. You have the big one's cookie exfiltration. Did you remember to set all the flags that you wanted to set? Is your cookie scoped to the correct domains and paths? Do you host anything that you don't directly control that might get a cookie that it shouldn't receive? One of the use cases I was thinking about is like, do you have pages that have debug enabled? And can I trigger a 500 error on those pages that causes the request to get like dumped into the output of the debug page that contains the cookie? Because then a cross-site scripting attack can very quickly turn into, I've got a signed-in authentication token. And you probably have cause policies that allow someone who gets in with a cross-site scripting attack to get those strings. So cookie exfiltration is the really, really big one. We've got JWT key theft, mismanagement. JWT keys, or JWKs, are long-lived keys, and they are just, we distribute them because we want to be able to verify them, and they are rather persistent, rather durable. There's very little evidence if a key gets stolen. Like when you get a JWT, it's very, very hard to figure out if that was from like a stolen version of your key or if you made it. So I think that adding like, some of the sort of JSON web, like signing and encryption stuff introduces like it opens a whole new can of worms. And that's one aspect. Another thing that's like a small aspect of this is like, sometimes we have edge caches, and there's people will make mistakes, they'll misconfigure something, and an authenticated response that's intended for one user gets shared to like everyone on the East Coast or something. It happens. And the way that cookies are now, they're kind of a generic key value store on which we've put authentication as like one of the use cases, and then we have to bundle all these flags on top to be like, don't share this over like an insecure connection, and only send this to me if I'm like the same site, and don't make this accessible via JavaScript. So we've built this big like house of cards on top of what is a very simple like key value store, and there is no like general way to identify an authenticated request from an unauthenticated request or response in the context of like browser sessions. Because it's pretty easy when you've got like authorization headers in like application requests, but it's pretty difficult in the browser. There's no standard way to discern those, and then stuff could end up in a cache shared between multiple users that shouldn't be. And this has happened before. There's also the ever-present risk of man-in-the-middle attacks. Most of us terminate TLS at some like load balancer or some like Kubernetes ingress point, and then there's a bunch of like sort of stuff where a request might make its way through behind there, where a request is not like wrapped up in end-to-end TLS, and someone could get in there. Like TLS is very secure over the wire, like while there is TLS, but when you take away the TLS and forward that request on somewhere else, boom. There's a cookie value, and if you get that cookie value, it's done. Logging, inadvertent logging is another really big attack sort of surface area, I think. We usually don't lock our application logs down as much as we lock down our production databases or our network traffic. And I think that that's like, the cookies are HTTP headers. It's very easy to just accidentally log a cookie value, and then someone gets into your like log processing SaaS platform and they get a cookie and then they sell it on the dark web. And then finally, endpoint security is a big one. Trusted computing or treacherous computing, if that's the way you like to think of it. I'm definitely like in the camp of like, I really like all the hardware security module stuff that we have, but I also worry that it can be used to like roll back the clock on general purpose computing and availability to us. But if you are an organization that does bring your own device, or you just have a lot of people who haven't updated their Chrome, who haven't updated their operating system, or who love like installing like the Ask Jeeves toolbar and like little apps that, like have Goose that walk around your screen, like that, in big organizations, we often don't have like a whole lot of security enforced on the endpoint, on the laptops that people are using. And we want a protocol that can somewhat better mitigate. Ideally, we don't have just like these secret strings living on people's hard drives that if someone gets it, they can compromise an account. So we have to smash the cookie. We have to smash it to bits because in its current form, it gets exploited a lot. Like cookie exfiltration, session hijacking is like a real thing. I'm explaining all these attack surface area things, but kind of like the proof is in the pudding or the cookie or whatever. Like there's attacks and they happen. So I think it's important to express, slightly more formally what we want out of a solution. We want a degree of man-in-the-middle resistance. We want it so that if someone is able to listen but not change every request flowing through, they would not be able to make a valid authenticated request themselves. That's like table stakes. We also want it that if they are modifying requests or doing things, able to sort of like change requests in the network or block requests or adjust timing, we want there to be some evidence to us that something was tampered with. We don't want it to require 3 different flags and a domain and a path scoping, et cetera, to be secure. Because as developers, we forget stuff all the time. And it would be great if we could also leverage some of the modern hardware that we have in terms of hardware security modules, trusted platform modules, passkeys. I have to say passkeys. It wouldn't be a talk at this conference without saying passkeys, but we do want to be able to leverage that stuff. And on the left, by the way, I've got kind of like implementation-related things, and on the right, I've got kind of user-related things. And on the top, I've got sort of technical properties, and on the bottom here, I've got experiential things. So we want the developer experience. We want it to be easy. Any system that we design to supplant the cookie, we want it to be somewhat easy to integrate. We want it to be fast. A really big thing about this is privacy. At this conference, we've heard a lot about sort of the importance of like identifying who someone is, but we also want the opportunity to browse the web without identifying who we are, and so we have to be able to preserve privacy. We want users to be able to decide when they want to start a session or not. We want sessions that are not identified with an actual specific user. And then finally, user experience. It would be really great if we had browser-level native integration of logins and logouts and sessions, right? Right now, like, who here has like been to their bank and that little thing comes up that's like, you've been inactive for 2 minutes and we're gonna log you out. Or you've tried to find like a logout button, or you've forgotten to click a logout button. And so we have like incognito mode, which is like kind of like using a bazooka to kill a mosquito, which is just wipe away the entire browser state. But it would be nice if we had some more like, the browser natively understood the notion of being logged in, of having a session. So that's my like quadrant of desires. That's like the rubric that I'm sort of going with in terms of how to evaluate a replacement system for cookies for authentication on the web. Time-wise, I'm going to skip really quickly. There's a bunch of prior work that's already been done. I was going to talk a little bit more about all of these, but you can Google all of those and get a very good summary of prior work that's been done. Some of what I'm about to like show you, this sketch of a protocol to replace it, rhymes with a lot of these things or borrows from it. There's a lot of interesting history, and there's reasons why some things worked and some things didn't, and I just don't have this is a short talk, I don't have a ton of time to go into it. So I'm going to sketch a new protocol that I call Web Session. And Web Session is hits a bunch of the things that we wanted to get. It starts out with a GET request to the web server, same as everything does right now. And that's the browser on the left, and that's the server on the right. The icons kind of look like that. So get slash. The server decides, I want to start a web session, which right now it does when you request a server and it's doing cookie-based sessions, it will create a little session and a key value table. It's going to generate a public and a private key pair, probably an elliptic curve point. And then it is going to get back to the client and be like, OK, let's start a web session. And I'm using the www authenticate header and the authorization header that already exists in HTTP, because why not? Let's just use the stuff that's already there. But it's going to say, here's the public key that I have generated. And then maybe some options. At this point, the client can decide, do I want to start a new session? Maybe there's prior configuration. Maybe the user has said, don't start a session anywhere. Maybe the user has used that website before and is always down to start a session with that website, giving control of session establishment back to the users. I'm assuming the user clicks yes, because if not, then nothing happens. Client generates its own key pair, and it's going to do Diffie-Hellman key exchange between the private half of its key and the public half of the server key. That gives it a secret. As an English person, I hate using this word, but it generates a nonce. You can look up later, but it's really annoying that as British security practitioners, we have to say that word out loud a lot. But the client is going to generate a nonce, because every signature needs a nonce. It generates a body, which is my public key, the server's public key. The origin, just for a little bit of extra security, to just keep everything, like some integrity along the wire, and that nonce. Okay, and then it forms a signature by doing HMAC on that secret that was arrived at through Diffie-Hellman key exchange and the body. This is the part of this protocol that's like somewhat novel, because a lot of protocols will require like a digital signature, like EDDSA, ECDSA on every single request. Elliptic curve stuff is pretty expensive, and it's actually kind of a lot to ask people to do validation and signatures on every single request. In this way, you do one expensive elliptic curve operation up front, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and then you're just doing HMAC from there on out. And that works pretty well, actually, because they're ephemeral keys. You don't really need non-repudiation like you get with digital signatures. But anyway, so it forms a signature. The token is the signature in the body, like separated by a dot or whatever. This is not too specific. And then finally, it just goes back to the server and says, get slash, again, and here's my web session. And the server verification, it just undoes, it goes back, it looks up the private key for the public key that's referenced, generates the secret through Diffie-Hellman, and again, if it's using the public half of the client's key and its private half that it has, it will arrive at the same secret. It has to check for nonce reuse. That is a critical part of the security flow for this. Even on failed things, it has to log that nonce was seen. And then finally, constant time comparison of the signature. It does the HMAC on the same secret, and it should match up. And if that all matches up, then a session has been established. And for subsequent requests, the client can just generate new nonces. The server is checking that those nonces aren't reused. Every request there has a signature with HMAC, SHA-256, or whatever you want, really. And it basically, that's the protocol. Again, it's a rough sketch of a protocol, but that's it. So there's a few little extensions that could be useful. I had in that initial part of the flow an options bit in there. I said here spub can be used as WebAuthn challenge, but basically, if you could indicate from the server, here, let's start this web session. I want you to use the shared secret as the challenge for WebAuthn. Then you can actually tightly cryptographically couple the session that you've established with the client to their WebAuthn identity. And what's really nice about that is it fixes the issue that we have where we have this WebAuthn is this very cryptographically secure protocol, and then we just we say like, okay, like shortcut that because we have this like secret token, and now we actually have this cryptographically somewhat more rigid protocol that's like linked to the actual user identification. So I really like that. Another thing, like other ideas for options are, because the browser is now natively managing the notion of a session, it can say, I'm a bank, I'm a healthcare website. When the user locks the device, log them out. Domain and path scoping is another aspect, probably useful. But one property of the system is that if the wrong person, if some like, something that you don't control happens to get a web session token, it can't do anything with it. It doesn't have either of the ephemeral key pairs needed to even validate the signature, let alone manipulate the request and try to use that token itself to do something nefarious. I also added first-party sets recently. It's something that's under discussion, but the idea of like, being able to say you can reuse this session across these domains, and I can, first-party sets is like a pretty recent thing from Google, motivated by, oh, we have these domains, but they don't all share a common suffix, and we do want to express that they're related. There's a lot of like related work in that field, but it'd be nice to be able to reuse a session across different related websites. I'm not going to do this, but like I was going to go through all this stuff again, but it hits, just trust me, the protocol I sketch hits a bunch of the points. We learn all the time. So in summary, and to close it out, cookies are bad. We're stuck with them right now. We could improve them, make them cryptographically more secure, make them more man-in-the-middle resistant, tamper-evident, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, more user-friendly, more private. It's going to take work. It's going to take protocol-level stuff. And big question is, are the incentives there? One of the biggest browser vendors, the biggest browser vendor, relies on a proliferation of like key value cookies that your browser just regurgitates. Because if you had something like this, where the user is in control of the sessions, you could just disable cookies everywhere and be like, if a website supports web session, just don't use cookies. That might kind of work contrary to what some people want. So the incentive thing is a big thing, and I've left it as like literally the last thought in this entire presentation, but it's somewhat important. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for attending. I know there's like a lot of really good talks going on right now. And I think we have a few minutes, 2 minutes for questions, but I'm going to be here if anyone wants to ask me anything as well. So yeah, thank you. No questions? Cool. Great. That means it was really good and there's nothing to go. Oh, hey. Well, I think it exhibits the same properties of like cookies are domain scoped. These web sessions are domain scoped. So how is it solved right now? That's kind of, oh cool. Well, so I'm trying to understand. So the problem is that your cookies, I might need to sketch this out on paper because this is like, that's why I had like a bunch of diagrams on this. So you are logging in via OAuth to something. You have an authorization and a resource server. But are those like OAuth tokens? Are we talking about like OAuth tokens? Because this is about user logging into a website and not applications making calls to things on behalf of, right? Because like tokens, if you're making the calls from JavaScript and doing web stuff, then that's kind of already like, if you're making a request from JavaScript, you can do whatever you want. You can do OAuth, you can do OAuth depop. That kind of solves like that problem. This is more about like, I'm logging into like Slack, and when I come back to Slack, to authorize something, it's using these cookies and stuff. But this is not really about delegated authentication and authorization, if that's...
Yeah, but like discuss it offline, the delegated part was for them to reach out to the original identity provider?
So this is about sessions, not identity. And that's really, really key here. This does not mean logging in, identifying. This is about establishing. Identity is proving who you are. Sessions are remembering who you are. Sessions are like, I make a request to the server, and I make another request, and the server just remembers that I'm the same person who made that first one. This is not necessarily, I think this is orthogonal to the problem of who am I? It is actually just like, oh, I'm the same person who did that first thing. I think we are like very much out of time, but we can chat offline. It's like hard to.
So it's like about maintaining trust versus establishing trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, that's why it's like proving who you are versus remembering who you are, right? Like, I don't need to, if I go to Starbucks and I use a fake name for my coffee, it doesn't matter that it's not my real name. What matters is that when I go to pick up the coffee, I'm waiting for the right coffee, right? And so pseudonymity is like an important property of the system, I think.